Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Unlocking Venture Capital. I'm here with Mike MacCombie today. Hey, Mike, how's it going?
Doing all right. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. So I met Mike here in New York, and he's been everywhere really, and he's one of the busiest people I know, and also just so interesting. One of the people that went from the operations side to the investor side, and would love to kind of understand the mind frame and the mindset of how that is, why, and I also have some rapid questions for you at the end as well. Just would love to get your perspective on something. So, Mike, why don't you walk us through how you got into VC and why you went from the ops side to the investment side, and why right now you think is a good time to be in investment side.
For sure. So path, why, and timing now. Okay. Yeah, I have a very random path getting into venture capital. I'll give a little bit of background just because it explains kind of why I did what I did, because otherwise it looks like you're just throwing darts at a board. I'm the son of two psychologists. I've always been a geek for how the mind works. When I was in college, I studied economics, public policy, and education, worked at a school, worked for a startup, worked for a politician. The reason why I say that is my first career, I was a teacher, and that was because when I was working at a school, the founder of the school had done Teach for America in New York City, taught sixth grade students math in Harlem. And he said, no matter what you do, maybe teaching might be a good first career to try out. So I did that. And I decided to go in. I ended up doing Teach for America for 2 years, taught middle school students with special needs in South Bronx. First 2 years, I wanted to get even better after that, did 2 more years in Harlem. And then after 4 years, I decided to move into the next career. I wanted to work with startups, but my brother had been a founder of a CPG company, which is one of the bigger crucibles one can do when founding a startup. And I said, if I'm going to give my all again, like I did to teaching, I want to do it with the right one. So didn't find one that I really resonated with so much to dive right back into the gauntlet of being there. So I worked with a bunch of startups in terms of storytelling, fundraising, things of that sort. A teacher going into tech, you don't really know where the skills are, but turns out 6,000 lessons being taught to students to help them understand something transferred a little. Got into behavior science-based consulting. I met somebody who was sort of running a boutique consultancy with companies, ended up studying a lot of behavior science applied research, and was helping companies with everything from referral programs, loyalty programs, events, communities, experiences, et cetera, with a behavior design lens. The one thing I'll say is once you put on sort of the rose-colored goggles of behavior design, it's hard to ignore. And so I joined a VC firm after that, was their head of platform for 4 years, and the same lens started coming through of how do we make things better. So content, community, events, marketing, and all that. But I was getting an itch, and I think there was just a different thesis view of the kind of companies that I was really intrigued by and the kind of companies the fund was intrigued by. I think at the end, I wasn't a check writer at that fund, but I was getting, I think, about 25% top of funnel deals just through everything I
Really?
was. Yeah.
So that's
So,
very unusual for somebody who's not in the investment role. Yes.
I mean, at one point I was hosting about 300 events in a year and writing a two different newsletters in a week that had 75% open rate. So just the name came up a lot and people started reaching out, I guess. But I couldn't get this behavioral design idea out of my head. There's something here and there's a layer and a lens. It's like somebody who goes in with a full accounting lens or somebody who goes in with a go-to-market lens. The principles of behavior design just said, there's some insight here that I'm not seeing. So I ended up leaving that fund. And while doing some of the things on the side, I was doing a very stealth pre-seed and seed stage fund. The folks I was working with full time or sort of know about it and they're supporters of that. But I just couldn't not scratch that itch. So whilst doing daytime work, I run a stealthy sort of $2.5 million pre-seed fund where I'm investing in vertical SaaS, B2B marketplaces, supply chain logistics, and compliance tech as my four main areas with a generalist mandate, but sort of a high focal point there based on what I've learned.
So what is so interesting is also, first, what was that CPG company that got you intrigued? What was your brother's CPG company? What did they
Oh,
sell?
it was called Runa Energy. It was a Ecuador-based Guayusa tea drink that had a social enterprise reforestation angle. It was so cool seeing sort of the product in Fairway shelves and Whole Food shelves
Yeah,
at the
that
time.
is exciting because
Yeah.
that's a really difficult step to possibly take in your entrepreneurial journey. There's just so much rejection there. It's a really competitive space. So good on you guys. And in terms of the stealth fund, so in terms of the stealth fund, who do you tell about the stealth fund? How do you actually raise when you have something in stealth? And how do you know that information isn't going to be leaked in places that you don't want? Because a
Well,
lot of people under stealth, they can get a little self-conscious. But how do you take this?
Well, stealth is not secret. I
Yeah.
mean, plenty of people know that I wrote a fund. There's a few reasons why, but anybody can find out about it. Like if they see the name of the fund on a cap table, I'm not going to share the name of it because we're going to keep it stealth.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Then they know it's there. So the reasons for keeping it stealth is one, it's behavior design. And so my goal is to make every fund a test of multiple different theories and to make it memorable and unique. So for the first fund, we gave code words, code names, and code emojis to our LPs. I never announced anything about the funds. It has sort of a non-toxic masculinity fight club energy to it. They're in the sense of just like you don't really talk about the fund outside of the thing
Yeah.
unless sharing it with another LP, etc. I raised everything that I raised without a pitch deck, so I managed to pull some
Well, then
strings.
they can't share it. That's also true.
I mean, they can
Very good,
share,
very good.
and I never even mention the name of the fund in anything that I write down. So just like, oh, this
Amazing.
is a stealth fund, but it's kind of the fun of it. It's the fund I was at before I started the fund. I had thought about doing a fund internally with them, and they sort of told me, you're going to need our brand name to be able to raise a fund. And I said, I think I can do it without any brand name. Let's find out. And so that was part of the challenge too.
Yeah, I think it's a really good challenge to have. I feel like you should write a book about this later. Just a thought. And yeah, it's so funny. It's really interesting that you kind of explain it as like a fight club model because everybody can really relate to what that is.
A lot of connotations with that. I do have female LPs as well, but it's a sense of like, oh, we're just all in on this. We're all
Yeah.
working together. We have a
Do
WhatsApp
all the
group.
LPs know each other?
There's a database that they can see each other, so it's not secret from me.
Okay.
And I have a WhatsApp group for all of my LPs where I'll sort of share deal flow on a daily basis that I see that's worth looking at. And I'll just say, hey, you should meet them because they're in town doing this thing. So it's a very communal feel to it.
Okay, so I do want to ask you about your WhatsApp group. So for those who don't know, Mike has the most complex, different sets of WhatsApp group. It's basically like if you see in the background, there's like a lot of post-its. It's like that, but like somehow in his brain and created in a way that actually makes sense in the world. It definitely is so many
Yeah,
things.
if we're going like that side, then we're looking at a whole bunch of posts.
So what got you the idea of creating these levels of WhatsApp groups? And what was your very first WhatsApp group for the VC startup community that you created? And when was that?
That's a good question. I'm at 95 of them right now, so I'm blanking on the exact first, but I can give a guess. What I always wanted to build was I think there's something magical about having the ability to say, hey, somebody needs help. I want to send one message out to get them taken care of.
Mhm.
And it's kind of hard to get clear on who each person is that can help. So what I started doing is I started thinking of like, if we take, like the Price is Right Plinko board back in the day of every slot has its
I
own value.
remember that.
And I would say, okay, if I drop a disk into the right slot, can I get everybody who's relevant to know about something? I
Yeah.
used to think of building an app where just like it'd be a drop-down notification top of screen, say, do you like prop tech? Yes, no. Do you like pre-seed? Yes, no. And then you start building these lists, but no need to build an app. I can just announce it and say who wants to join a WhatsApp group, and then I can send it all to them that way. But yeah, so that was the thing, is having sort of distribution on demand.
And do you remember what was your theme around the first one that you created?
So I think the first one that I did was my pre-seed deal flow call one.
Okay.
I've been running one of my behavior design elements was, everybody thinks if you're sharing a deal, it's not good. If you're doing that, then you shouldn't even take a look. And I said, I think that's wrong. I think you need to protect trust, you need to protect allocations. But I've been running a pre-seed deal flow call for about 4.5, 5 years. And so we're at a few hundred investors that share deals with each other in a WhatsApp group. It's pretty friendly. There's no strangers. I don't add anyone I don't know. And so it's pretty communal for that.
That's amazing. And yeah, and so I love being in your WhatsApp group. I've met a lot of great people through them and people talk about them. And what's also really interesting, in case you guys don't know, is within a very active ecosystem, like the one that we're in, you would go to an event and people are like, are you in this one of Mike's WhatsApp group versus this one? Like people actually do talk about that. I'm like, what is this one? No, I'm in this one. And yeah, and so just like having that conversation feels so organic and authentic, but it also feels so funny because like this would never happen. Like when a VC first started, that's like not a thing. And you also just wouldn't be asking each other, are you in these kinds of digital groups? And kind of like to explain to each other what it is in a way that also makes sense because it's not complicated, even though I feel like it's triaged in your mind in a probably much more complex way. But I just thought that was really funny that people do actually have these conversations when you're not even in the room and you probably already know them, that happens probably every day that they're talking about it. So great job on building something that is easy to understand and that is very direct to people's needs and solutions all at the same time. And it's all done in real time, which is so interesting. So I want to get your understanding on how you feel about, so just term the startup and VC ecosystem, access network gatekeeping. Okay. So
Okay.
there are great people with great networks, and you have lots of access to different kinds of things. There's also people who try and gatekeep it, and try and produce it in kind of a different way. So you'd either have to pay for a membership to meet other, I don't know, women or VCs or professionals or whoever in your silo that are like you, and without this access you are locked out from XYZ. How do you feel about those things in terms of the perspective of a founder, in terms of the perspective of a community builder, and of course an investor?
Well, I'm going to go to soapbox and be a little blunt because I don't think I've ever charged for a community I run.
Not
Um,
you, but you know that it exists.
oh, I know that, but my opinion comes from a biased perspective. The only things I would ever charge for would be if there's a clear overt value that somehow generates revenue. Like I've never charged for anybody. So my view is if somebody's charging, they're either trying to make it a full-time thing, and I think monetary incentives skew how a community is run, or I think they're trying to be extractive, which neither of those I think is necessarily the right way to go. I think community is a leverage point for everything else. All the deals that I've done that I've gotten from other people came from the goodwill of running what I run. And so I think people are either playing the short-term game or not. Now, if you know there's something that is such an overt value and so hard to get, and you are so uniquely able to provide it that people are willing to pay, I think that's fine. If you're using a small fee that's nominal to get people to have a buy-in and be invested in, that's fine. But if somebody is saying, I want to make money, let me build a community, that biases it. If you say, hey, I'm building a community, I think this is worthwhile. I wonder if it's worth charging as well. Sure. So I can think of family office communities that charge $15,000 a year and they don't really produce much. And I'd say, I feel weird if I charge money for something that I can't provide value on in terms of a community. But there are other ones that I think are worthwhile. It just depends on the incentives and if the genuine goal is to build a good community or the genuine goal is to use community to make money.
Yeah, that's a really good perspective. And I don't know how they're going to kind of look in the future as information is being shared in different kinds of ways, in a much more free-flowing way as well. And yeah, and so there are communities where people are leaving for certain reasons, like you mentioned, and there are communities where people are like, okay, well, if I can build the same network on my own, why do I need to pay a membership and then pay more to go to these, XYZ events? And, what is the value at the end of the day that this is bringing me? So I think that makes a really good point. And you're right, the family office ones are up to like $40,000 a year, and you still have to pay to go to each individual event, because they were trying to recruit at an event that I was at this week, because I'm part of a family office, right? I was like,
Yeah.
I don't see them wanting to pay for this, but thank you for that invitation. But like, yeah, that's like rent. That's like a house, and
I mean, for some of us, that's a year's worth of rent.
right,
Yeah.
right, exactly. And in terms of there are a lot of emerging funds out there, okay? And so, being a fund manager per se, how would you feel that you are going to cut through the noise in terms of what you're building? Because I know what you're building feels very unique, but how would you get to explain it to other people?
So I think I've actually helped other people with fundraising before, so it comes through pretty clearly for me. I think if you can't think of 5 reasons why your fund needs to exist amidst the sea of everything else, and so the reason that I think mine needs to exist is for a few reasons, and I can go through. There's no particular order, but these are the things that come up. First is I think there's a unique LP experience that hasn't been created thus far in terms of how LPs want to be in there. I'm an LP in one fund, and it was good enough. They've gotten good enough returns. It was fine, and I just said, this is as a wonderful floor. But I see so much more from that behavioral point of like, why do I pay attention and why do I have it?
Yeah.
So for new LP, so there's 3 LPs that I typically service. One is angel investors who are looking for better deal flow distribution.
Okay.
2 is a group of people that I'm not even going to mention to keep it stealth, who want to have access to deal flow, but they're not allowed to invest in startups specifically, not by
Okay.
law,
The
but by
individual people.
individuals. Yeah. So this isn't exactly, but like, let's say you work at Meta and you're never allowed to invest in any startup, but you want
Oh,
to.
right. Okay. Yeah. Because of non-competes, and 500 startups does the same thing.
Same thing. And then the third thing is for GPs and family offices that want deal flow as well.
Mhm.
So one of the statistics that I've used is that for every dollar invested in my fund, my LPs have actually invested $2 into startups that I've shared with them from my portfolio or from just the deal flow pipelines that I run. So basically, it's a very strong co-invest vehicle with access and with a frequent update. 2 is the deal flow itself. I share anywhere between 1 to 6 deals on a daily basis, curated. I don't share something that's not worth a look. in terms of what I see. And so people sort of say, hey, if I want to get access to things at an early stage that not many people are seeing, we do that. Three is I particularly invest in founders that don't come from a very strong pedigree in tech, but they may come from a very experienced pedigree in their industry. So there's an under-networked element of the folks that I've invested in. I think my heaviest city is Chicago. And so, I'll have a company run by a guy who's run a brokerage for a certain product for 8 years, non-technologically, and he wants to build a tech platform for it. That's somebody who I'd go for rather than, the first PM at LinkedIn or something, building something in a completely different sector, just going off pedigree. And I say, that's amazing. I love bottoms up inside, and I love people who know their industry more than people who say, I have tops down that side. Because I think I just want to see people that can get distribution, clear customer demand there. And I think the last thing, one of the other reasons is I believe in the non-hypey industries. I think there's a lot of truffles that are available in terms of finding sectors you didn't even know existed, with massive watersheds and massive underwater caverns where you can do. I think lastly is to help founders that are looking to get sort of distribution at that early stages. I have an ability to get in and get allocation and help finish off the round. So I think, and that's sort of the non-obvious ones. Like vertical SaaS is underfunded. I think it's 50% of the GDP in terms of vertical specific companies, and only 12% of funding goes to them. That's why I love the verticalized industries. Under networked founders, access to deal flow from the LP experience, small fund size. And I think there's also an accessibility point. Like the average check into my first fund has been 10K on average for LPs. And so it's sort of combo LP experience, combo the fund, combo the stage, combo the geographies we go, and our focus on sort of the most boring companies possible.
Yeah, that's really great. It's true. Like a lot of people, especially younger people, wanted to get into funds or wanted to start being an LP early on in their career, either because they joined the fund and things like that and wanted to do it themselves. But the minimum was just too high and they were priced out. And so, there weren't that many other options that they could do to angel invest or learn about, how to really take control of their own future. So that's really interesting that you point that out.
Yeah. And it's sort of everything that I wish I had, when I had to pony up $25,000 is the minimum for the
No,
other one. So
I remember when I was living in the Valley and, I was wanting to invest in this app called WAG. We didn't have it in Canada and it was like a dog walking app, kind of like what Rover is now. And the minimum check size was like 50K. And I was 26. I was like, no, it was so sad. Um,
stuff.
one day, if only there was like a fund like Mike's at the time. So I wanted to ask you in terms of how do you rank or how do you know that you're getting better or stronger in terms of your network? Is it getting towards the level that you want? How do you know if it's strong or weak, like in terms of your relationships or your network with people?
Well, I think it depends on what criteria you're looking at in terms of strong or weak. Am I like, if we're going existentially end of life situation, but I'm meeting good people and I'm around them? If I'm happy around them, then I feel like I'm pretty strong. If I feel happy, intellectually stimulated, and consistently growing around the people that I spend time with, I feel pretty happy. I think there's a little factor as well. I'm a huge believer in serendipity, and not in the sense of just randomness, but saying, how do I open up the opportunities to have more exposure and the random things that come through? That's huge for me. So if I just find that there's more and more serendipitous moments that are popping up, more loops I get pulled into, like I'm very grateful to meet people that have exposed me to very interesting experiences, opportunities, stories, and things of that sort. I kind of can tell. And I think on the fun side, if I just find that I'm getting more and more opportunities that I'm really happy to see and grateful for, and also if I'm able to provide more serendipity to others, then I say, you can just kind of tell. It's like seeing, you don't know exactly what it is, but when you see one firefly turning into 10 fireflies, turning into 100 when you're in the backyard, seeing the things go off, that's a pretty good sign.
So these are all like, the optimal times, right? If things are going up, 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 up. And that's really great in terms of a network effect. What if, somebody has or provided a project or an opportunity or things like that you found particularly useful, but the relationship isn't something you want to contribute to in the long term for whatever reason, or they're not providing that positive energy now as they did before for their own reasons. How do you kind of feel in terms of the reciprocal energy? Do you feel like, okay, well, I still need to spend time with this person, or I still need to provide for this person or this group or things like that, even if, at this time, the energy level is not there and it's not providing me anything positive in the future, but it provided me something positive in the past?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of things that I'm hearing here in terms of that. So in terms of whether I support them, whether I get involved myself, and whether I continue the energy. I will say that I've had friends that just, I simply find that there's less resonance now, and I don't excommunicate them. I just sort of, I'm less needing to reach out to them. If they text me, yeah, I'll get back to them, etc. On projects, my view is, I've got two views. One, If I like somebody and it's just not a fit for me, like, they're very in their head and all that, and it doesn't work for me, that's fine. I'll make sure that they meet other people that I think will be accretive to their goals and visions. In terms of the fund, I've invested in folks with varying personalities. My general feedback, though, is if I can't give them feedback and have it at least be heard, I don't need them to take all my feedback. I claim I'm an idiot compared to them in their specific sectors. Then that's not a working relationship. And if I don't feel like I'd ever want to work for them, I think that's another thing of saying, if I would never see myself working for them or with them, what does that mean for employees, other investors, acquirers? So it's more of I don't need to work with a particular personality, but I need to believe that at least enough people would find them interesting and compelling. I've got a founder in my portfolio who's very long-winded, but I can tell him like, hey, I totally got the point. Thank you so much. And he responds like, awesome. I've got a founder who's very headstrong, but I can tell he does his research every single spot. And I say, amazing, you do what you got to do.
Yeah.
But I can't have a conversation with them. I mean, there are some who will say if they've done 5 exited companies, I'm like, that's amazing. But I invest in companies that I believe should exist in the world, not just that I think are going to get a lot of money. So
I know that you go to a lot of events and a lot of things kind of come your way and you meet lots of new people all the time. Okay. In terms of, let's say you met somebody new or they were speaking on stage or something like that, and you felt very inspired. You felt like this person should be in my network. I should start trying to build a relationship with this person. I want this person in my future, in my life. Okay. What are 3 tips that you would give to people who are trying to build either a relationship in terms of a friendship, mentorship, or any kind of positive relationship with new people that they're meeting? How would you up that a notch?
well, I think one is making sure okay, so I have 3 things that I think come to mind. I'll call it invite, loop, and worthwhile. So the first thing is you might be impressed by somebody and think you want them in your life, but if they're 10 years into their journey and they're just kind of focused on who they're focused on, it doesn't mean that they will be. You can't convince every single person to spend the time you want, but what I do find is having a non-attachment is very helpful. So yeah, it's like when you go on a date or something, like you meet somebody, but if there's no connection, it doesn't matter if you like them a lot or not. It just doesn't work out. And that's fine. So I'll meet people. I think the biggest thing I would say is one, sorry, I'm thinking out loud as we go through this. It's not a prepared answer. The first one is lead with curiosity and lead with just sort of supporting them. Don't go with the need. The job I got in behavior science, I actually walked up to the guy at the end of an event and everyone was saying, oh, can I come to this event? Can I do this thing? And I just said to him, I don't need any of your time. I think I might be able to save you some time. If that's of interest, let me know. Left it at that. He ended up interviewing me. It was but that journey came just because I said, I don't need anything from you, but it might be fun. I met somebody actually last night at a dinner who's had some very interesting experiences. And I just let in saying like, what's been most on your mind lately? And if they don't want to talk, they don't want to talk. And that's a good filter. But sort of leading the questions I would ask if you just want something to go off of is like, what's been on your mind lately? They can go in whatever direction they want. It's open to them. And if they say like, what do you mean? You just say, intentionally ambiguous. What's been on your mind?
Yeah.
And then, if you knew you couldn't fail, what would you do? Just like questions that are open-ended enough that lets them explore and lets them lean into like their humanity.
Yeah.
If we're getting tactical beyond that, the 2 things I would say is one, always have something to invite them to. Because frankly, I get sick of the 50 people at an event saying, let's go for coffee. Let's go for coffee. I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to enjoy the coffee with you.
Yeah.
I might be able to help you, but I just say, hey, nice meeting you. I've got a community for this thing. If it's of interest, I'm happy to get you looped in. And basically, it's a way of sharing the things with them that I'd want to share anyways, without having to have a coffee and do the thing, unless I really think we're going to connect. And then the other is always have a loop. And what I mean by that is loops that bring people closer and closer into your orbit. So saying, I've got one event, that's awesome, but then they're going to go to the event, and then how do you keep in touch with them? Or how do you give yourself an ongoing context?
Yeah.
Loops can look different. It can be a newsletter. It could be, frankly, following you on Twitter if you create really good content. It could be an event series. It could be a community. And you say, hey, if I meet a New York City investor, I'll say, hey, I've got a community for New York investors. It's about 600 on WhatsApp. We just share events, content, insights. And then 1, I have their contact info if I ever need to reach out to them to help a founder raise or something. But 2, then if I need to reach out, I'm not going to guarantee I'll get every single person to pay attention, but at least I have a context in which they can get exposure, learn more about me, get closer and closer in the loops, and then serendipity takes its.
Those are really good tips. And I love that you have sectored out in terms of like, what is the objective and how does that kind of look like after you ask the first few questions? Because you're right. It might not go anywhere and it might just be like a close conversation at the end. And that's, these are great analogies. So people always say that, you know, in terms of your VC career, it's really important to rely on your network. It's really good to build relationships, all of these things. Okay. And it is like a very relationship based role. So in terms of that, does that mean every VC needs to be a community builder?
Hell no. One thing, I'll dive into that in a second. The one thing I was going to add at the end is if you have another question to ask somebody, I always just say, like, if you had a practical magic lamp, or if you just needed help with anything right now, like, what would give you leverage right now? And so
Great
you might not,
question.
you might not be the person to solve it, but you might know something who could. Just like, I might have that connection.
These are also really good founder due diligence questions. Like, what would give you an unfair advantage in something in the near future to solve a
Yeah.
problem? Yeah.
And help them build a wish list for you in case you can help or not.
Yeah.
I'm not going to invest in the founder if there's no way I can help them unless I just know I really enjoy what they're building. So community building, hell no. I mean, it's like saying, does every founder need to be an operator, or does every VC need to be a former operator, or have an accounting background, or run financial models? No, it's my skill set and my leverage point. I think there are people that build an amazing brand that have very little community and that are so data driven. I'm not going to say they don't have community. They do. Like 645 Ventures has an entire software platform that they run for sourcing and scouting. It's like the building something stealth mode LinkedIn searches, but they're an order of magnitude more advanced.
Yeah.
They have community, but they don't need that to be successful. Benchmark doesn't even have an effective website, but they built a reputation over time where people kind of know about them. So I think what you need is a reason to be able to discover companies, whether they reach out, whether it's community referrals. I'm heavily referral based, but also heavily content based. I can put a tweet out saying I'll introduce founders to investors. My favorite company I've invested in came from that one time. So it's building the places where people learn about you, know about you, and want to reach out to you.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. I love that. And then does that go also in the line of an emerging fund manager who's trying to raise in today's market?
I think it's the same thing. Emerging versus not basically means you have more at-bats you need to get the experience in. I know somebody who was very data-driven. She was running a deep tech-focused fund, and same thing, like community wasn't the biggest point. It was more data-driven, more focused on outreach to universities. I think you just need to find leverage of exposure, access, and understanding. Mine just happens to be, I know a lot of people. I'm not a big fund. I'm usually a pretty good one to help out, and I provide a lot of leverage per dollar. And people have seen me for 5 years, so it's pretty easy for them to think of me when it comes up.
I think it's easy to think of you too, to be fair. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mike. And thank you everyone for tuning in on another episode of Unlocking Venture Capital.
Thank you for having me.